Salutations everybody, it is Maddie here today with a Bethesda Game Studios news update, and this is so exciting because Bethesda Game Studios is expanding with a new office in Montreal, so this is important information regarding the future of their studio as well as their games. So before I get into anything, as I've specified twice now, this is Bethesda Game Studios. A lot of people are thinking this is just a new Bethesda office that's expanding for their publishing arm or something. No, this is a team that is expanding upon Todd Howard's team and setting up a brand new office in Montreal to make the Bethesda Game Studios team even bigger and more strong. So this is why it's exciting, and I'm going to go into some pros, cons, and answer some questions for you guys. Let's start off with the pros. The obvious that we all put together right when we saw this article is that this means quicker development time. This means that games will come out faster. This means DLC will come out faster. They can start pre-production earlier with more people on the projects, and that should excite any gamer out there. Now, this also is worth mentioning that perhaps Bethesda has finally realized that 4 to 5 year development cycles just aren't optimal because it leads to PR backlash, issues in the community, impatience, confusion, etc., and people don't know what's going on. So now they perhaps are slimming it down just a little. Maybe now it'll be 3 years each time a Bethesda Game Studios game comes out, maybe even 2.5 if we're lucky, because at this rate they're almost doubling their team. The new studio, according to The Office, has 40 new developers, and they are currently hiring for both the Maryland and Montreal locations. So that means that perhaps they're aiming for about, I'd say, 170 to 200 people, and if Bethesda could build a game like Fallout 4 with about 110 people, I'm dying to see what they can do with almost 200 people. The article goes on to say that Bethesda Game Studios announced that it has opened a new development studio in Montreal, Quebec, to expand its development capabilities in console, PC, and mobile gaming. Bethesda Game Studios Montreal has already established a core team of more than 40 developers, as I said, spanning both console and mobile development. The studio will be managed by industry veteran Yves Lachance as the studio director. More on this later. The next pro is that they finally got with the times and realized that maybe 110 people is just too few. Now, we all know that Bethesda has prided themselves on the fact that they have great chemistry in their office, that everyone works together perfectly fine, and that the reason that they can make these big games like Fallout 4, like Skyrim, is because of the small team and just how close they are. The person who's worked there the least amount of time has been like a decade, which is insane. And so with all this trust in the office, it brings about these big games. And so now I think they realize with games like The Witcher 3 coming out and stealing that title away from Bethesda, where they used to kind of lead the open world RPG genre, where now they've kind of slipped a little. Perhaps this is a step forward to be like, we want to make bigger and better games than we ever have before, and we have to make a bigger team to do that. And I kind of appreciate that because I can understand why Bethesda may have been a bit uncomfortable to expand this team because it's a formula that always works, but I feel like they realize that they're not going to get anywhere without taking risks. They could continue to make games every 4 to 5 years with the Maryland studio, or they can make bigger, better games every 3 years with additional people working in a Montreal studio. Also, I mentioned DLC earlier, and I figured that this is likely how they plan on giving us all of that bonus DLC. In the season pass, they did mention how they plan on giving us additional content on top of the expansions that they planned for us at some point in time, because they just wanted to make the season pass worth it. And I was wondering to myself, when they have pre-production going on their next game already, on top of Fallout 4 patches, and then working on DLC, how are they going to fit in time to give us this little bonus content? And now it makes sense because they've expanded to a new studio where they can have a lot of people working on various different things, and I feel like that's kind of the key to all of this. Let's shift over to the cons now. Will this ruin Bethesda's chemistry? I know we talked about this a lot in this video, but it is something worth considering that we've seen in the products just how big and awesome Bethesda Game Studio games are, even though their teams are relatively small. Is expanding really going to help or hinder them? Will this same chemistry translate over to the Montreal office, where now they can split up divisions on who does what? Will that Montreal office have that same type of chemistry as the Maryland office? Will they butt heads with different creative ideas? That's the only issue that comes with this, but I think they also realize that this happens even in their own office. They've said in multiple videos before how they argue and dispute over multiple creative decisions. The other potential con is the studio lead for this Montreal office. Now, I was looking at his LinkedIn profile and I found out that he worked at Behavior Interactive, which has a very, if I'm honest, unimpressive track record. But The one saving grace to this was that they actually worked on Fallout Shelter for both the iOS and Android. So then it brought about the other question. The article clearly specifies that they have 40 developers plus working on both console and mobile development. I am praying that this does not mean that this is just a division solely focused on the mobile market. I understand that Bethesda needs to make their money, but mobile games do not excite Bethesda Game Studio gamers. If you want to expand upon Fallout Shelter and Elder Scrolls Legends, by all means do so, but please do not focus on the mobile market. It just kind of worries me that the guy who was the leader of this development project is now a part of Bethesda Game Studios, and that office is primarily focused on console, albeit, but still mobile development as well. Regardless, those are just two concerns I wanted to bring up. Now it's time for some questions that I've been getting on my Twitter a lot that I feel are worth answering. Does this mean Bethesda can undertake a new IP? We recently just talked about it in an article with IGN, how they said Fallout 4 should be the last Fallout and that they should expand to a new IP, and people are asking me now, well, Maddie, you said that if they expanded, maybe they could take on a new IP. What do you think about this? And I personally still feel that in order for them to take on a new IP, they need to expand even more than this office right here. And the reason I say that is because when they take on a third IP, all they do is regress back to the point that they were already at, where Bethesda alone in Maryland had trouble bouncing between Fallout and Elder Scrolls so much. And if you bring in the Montreal studio, now you can get Fallout and Elder Scrolls games out as fast as you'd kind of like to between a 2.5 to 3 year development cycle. Then you bring in a third IP and you regress back to now you need longer development cycles, or rather less development cycle time, but more space in between these games, where now unfortunately there's going to be titles left dormant, which fans won't appreciate because there are diehard fans for Elder Scrolls, there are diehard fans for Fallout. And although I want Bethesda to bring out a new IP that would be super exciting, it is worth considering that all it would do is regress them back to the point that they're at now. The big issue with Bethesda Game Studios is that they have two fan favorite IPs, Elder Scrolls and Fallout, and couldn't get either out in enough time to satiate the fans' thirst for the game. Now they have a new studio that's expanding with more hirings coming in as well, and perhaps this does mean that, hey, we can get these games a bit quicker, but you bring in a third IP and it's just going to regress everything they just did. The other question that I want to answer is, since both studios are hiring, how big will both teams get? We know that Bethesda Game Studios in Maryland has about 110 people and they're currently hiring, and we already know that Montreal has more than 40 developers and they're currently hiring. My guess is that Bethesda Game Studios in Maryland is only going to hire a select few people, but in Montreal, I'd imagine they're going to go at the upwards of, I'd say 60 to 80. I feel like if they planned on launching a giant office in Montreal, they would have started with more than 40 developers. Perhaps this seems to be more of an assists office than an actual standalone office. And the reason I specify that is because this whole article that's very brief is all about collaborating with Bethesda, collaborating. And it's not about we want to stand alone and make our own games. They say that we are thrilled to be launching the studio in Montreal and contributing our city's great game making to the kind of games that Bethesda Game Studios is known for, as in they're putting their own contribution into it. I doubt that means they're going to stand alone and do it on their own, considering there's only 40 or so of them. So that means that they're likely going to be assisting Maryland in whatever they are working on. And so I'm thinking to myself, how big will both these teams get? I'd imagine Maryland is going to expand a little bit less, but rather the one in Montreal is going to be getting the bulk of the attention in the hirings, and reasonably so because it's a fresh, brand new studio. But those are my extended thoughts on the new office opening in Montreal. All in all, this is fantastic news because if anything I mentioned in this video, one thing holds true, and that means that more people, that means more games at a quicker pace. DLC will come out more often and it'll come out quicker. There will be pre-production starting earlier for games to get the ball rolling for future games. This is a good move for Bethesda and I'm happy they did it. And as a Bethesda Game Studios gamer yourself, you guys should be excited as well. But I'm dying to know your thoughts on this in the comments down below. Hit me with it, people. What do you think about the new expansion of Bethesda Game Studios? Other than that, be sure to follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. The links are down below. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.